And welcome to the Comics Experience Graphic Novel Club for the month of February. Love that word, February. And our book this month is the fantastic The New World by Mr. Aleš Kot and Trav Moore. We're really lucky to have Aleš here in studio. Whatever it is. And I want to thank you for coming out and being willing to do this in person and stuff. Look non-committal face, Jesus.
As an artist, it's my responsibility to give the gift of myself to others.
Very good, very good. I also, before we start, because I should always remember to do this, I want to thank our sponsors at The Beat. The Comics Beat, www.comicsbeat.com or comicsbeat.com, one or the other. It's the best website for comics news. And you should go there on a daily basis and click on their things so that they continue to sponsor the club. That's what you should do. So, The New World is a great book. This is a really, really good book. This is a fine piece of comicking, and I have a lot of questions. But the first question is always, comics. Why comics? What is it about comics that turns you on, man?
That's a great question. I have no idea because it changes so day by day. So I actually have to answer that question live without, kind of thinking about it too much. What does it for me today in terms of comics? What did I write today? I wrote no comics today. I wrote in two other art forms, but I've been thinking about comics a lot today. And one, it's the immediacy. I can be fairly certain that if I'm making a comic, it's very likely going to be held by people within a few months of when I'm writing it.
Yeah.
Which enables me to write from that perspective and enables me to take chances, sometimes culturally, but also on the basic level of craft, where I know that the refinement part, the equivalent of, let's say, going to the editing room in making movies or TV, which happens maybe a year or two, sometimes 10 after you wrote something, happens within those few months.
Sure.
And it enables this very particular, ideally sustained collaborative experience where you can, if you know how to work with your time, really create a continuous stream where you come back to the thing. I think in a way, including some very obvious, it's kind of similar to painting.
Sure.
And I think that applies whether you're a writer or the artist, if you're looking at comics as an art form that is distinctly massively visual, which it is. As much as the writing matters, comics are words and pictures, and you can do anything with words and pictures. So I guess that is the other part of it that always gets me excited, that there's such a simplicity to the form, but the way you can work within it makes it practically infinitely complex to me. And the way comics engage imagination through collaboration with the reader is completely unique to the form.
Yes.
I don't really know what the equivalent is, or if there is an equivalent to the space between panels in other forms, I think you can sometimes trace that to other forms of editing in other art forms, or if you look at Cy Twombly, series of paintings, you can sort of go, oh, that is kind of part of it, but also, is it the same thing, etc. Sure. And that gets me excited, and one of the reasons that gets me excited is because I think that, without being dogmatic about it, and speaking just for myself, one of the key things about art that really moves me very often goes back to art making me ask questions rather than art giving me answers.
Sure.
Like sometimes it's nice when art gives you some like level of slight self-confirmation or something, but the things that I really remember and I can keep coming back to usually aim at some spot that it sort of activates or reactivates and makes me obsess over it or makes me go, I will revisit this in 5 years and it's going to be exactly the same but also very different because it's going to grow with me. And yeah, those are some of the things that excite me.
Sure. Particularly liked about this book is, and especially in the first chapter, how you're using time and space in a way that you can't use in other things, where you're cutting back and forth between different points of view, and things are not necessarily happening in linear ways. I mean, no other medium than comics can do it successfully like this. I guess prose can to an extent, but it's really hard even there, right? Whereas comics, it's very easy to move in time, move in space, jump from place to place, that it's not just a matter of editing, right? At that point, it's something intrinsic to the form.
Are you trying to say that I'm a genius? Because that would be great.
Sure, no, you're a genius.
No, but yes, I think I understand your question, unless there's more that you want to elaborate.
No. I usually babble at these things, so.
I think that ultimately it comes back down to editing and making sure that whatever stream of information or streams of information you're conveying come together with maximum focus and clarity, even if they're supposed to read in a way that might be ambiguous or unclear. I think that communicating ambiguity in a way that's clear to what you want to communicate is one of the hardest things to do in arts ever, but also really fascinating to me, so I try all the time. I think the one thing that comics do particularly well that other forms do very rarely, like you can look at the way, let's say, Brian De Palma uses split screen, is you can convey a few different time streams on the same page. And the way you're taking the page in is both as a whole and as a sequential series, and you are in charge of the sequence.
Sure.
You're not in charge of the whole presentation. You get the whole image.
Yes.
But the way you then go around it is kind
As
of
the reader,
open
yes.
to imagination. Like, you can be partially led by the hand, but ultimately nobody else will control the way you do it, right? The equivalent to that, really, if we're going to go with the movies TV comparison, is having access to, like, the scenes or something almost like that, where you feel like you can do so much. Like, I feel like maybe videotapes partially got there back in the day if you had multiple receivers and you were like recording stuff, or you were like cutting by yourself, or the same way with like music and so on. But this, you don't need anything. All you need is an empty page and a pen or a pencil, and you can start.
Yeah, but it strikes me that in movies and television, generally, not always, you're always moving forward in time, right? Usually if you move backwards in time, you actually have to signify that to the audience in a way that stops action. Would you agree with that as a general statement? I mean, I'm sure there's some example that proves that's not true, but...
I would agree with that as far as like most of Western mainstream fiction goes.
Yeah, things are beat. It's always moving forward in time.
Yeah.
And comics, you're not constrained in that in any way, because the audience participates and determines things. That it's almost like you said, what's it close to? It's almost like a choose your own adventure in a way.
Yes.
Except that it's not, because choose your own adventures are stupid, No, but they are. They're very flat, right? Like, if you've ever read one, like even that Netflix thing, right? The Black Mirror, the Bandersnatch was great. That was great, but it didn't work past one viewing, right? Because you knew it was, and you had to sit through all this stuff that wasn't interesting. I don't know. Comics are not like that, where you move back and forth as a reader in a very natural way. That's what I'm just babbling now.
Is this going to be on the internet?
This is all being on the internet, yeah.
Love Netflix.
Yeah. I wasn't saying anything bad about Netflix.
Oh, no, I'm just saying,
Comic Space.
I'm available for funding, and I have a lot of...
I'm also available for funding. If you want the Graphic Novel Club on Netflix, I'd be very happy to talk to you about that, Netflix. All right. You are Czech, correct?
Technically correct.
Technically correct. Okay. You were born in.
I was born in Czech Republic back when it was still Czechoslovakia.
Okay,
yeah, technically I'm Czech.
Yeah.
Practically, I'm also an immigrant, and I barely believe in the existence of any borders whatsoever.
Yeah.
So that kind of sends it in all different spaces at the same time.
Yeah,
Also,
yeah.
I lived in America for about 10 years, and frankly, I dream in English. So at this point, I'm like, that's really not my first language. If you have to translate me back into Czech when I'm
Right.
writing something, that means that I'm not that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, that point was crushed.
This was not a prove your citizenship question. This was just
Doesn't matter.
I'm curious about background. So this gets back to the comics
yeah.
question. So in your childhood in Czechoslovakia, what comics were you exposed to? Were you exposed to American comics, or were they Eastern European comics? This is like one of those places where I just don't know anything, actually.
You know, I trace these things to a few different incidents between like being 1 and 10. One of the first is being about 3 and having pneumonia at the time and being very sick, and my mom being like going somewhere out, and it was like we were very snowed in, and I had to call the doctor and everything, and she brought me back some reading because I learned how to read very early on, and it was like there was some Donald the Duck comics and stuff. And I didn't remember it for a long time. I only recalled it retroactively when I think Grant Morrison or someone was telling me a similar story about himself. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh shit. I remember being that kid and feeling oddly transported and feeling like I wasn't thinking about my actual circumstances at the time, which was in that moment very helpful because sometimes you genuinely need that, right?
Yes.
Especially at times of extreme stress. And so that right now is like the furthest I can kind of trace it back.
Would these be like Egmont Disney
Yes.
reprints?
Yeah, like the first reprints. So that would be around when I was probably like 3 to 4, so 1990 or something like that.
So these are probably Swiss comics or French comics, something like that.
They were translated into Czech, but
they're not American. They're not Native American. Native to American.
I honestly can't tell you for sure. I would really have to trace it back.
Yeah.
But I mean, they were American. Like that was like Donald the Duck and stuff.
Sure.
So who knows?
It's Donald Duck. There's no the.
Oh, Donald.
There's no fucking the. Donald Duck. Sorry.
You're making me extremely tempted to like grudge make Donald the Duck as a character and pitch it somewhere and then inevitably get sued.
Yeah.
Then when I was about maybe 5 or 6, my grandfather, who used to be a truck driver, was supposed to dump like a gigantic amount of magazines somewhere and everything, and he knew that they would be just destroyed, and he found this stack of comics that were then getting freshly translated, including some Conan and like early Spider-Man by Stern and Romita, and like the comics adaptation of Terminator 2, and I don't remember what else.
Yeah.
And this was like 93 or 94.
Do you have any idea what the provenance of those comics was? Were they?
They were Czech. They were Czech translations, usually very bad Czech translations, like first attempts of the publishers.
Okay.
I think it was actually Egmont and like one of the bigger publishers who were just like trying out a new market. And that was really influential for me because all of a sudden, I already had access to movies and TV, satellite and everything else, and I was very, very much, and I read books since I was so young that there was so much happening in my head already. But I just ended up, carrying those comics everywhere and reading them very obsessively. And then when I was maybe 9 or 10, there were a couple of magazines that started coming out too, and there were some Czech comics too, but I was never that interested in those. And then some reprints of early 2000 AD stuff, an occasional Dark Horse comic like early Hellboys, and all kinds of random things started coming out at the same time, usually in some sort of like a package 2000 AD inspired deal.
Right.
And I just remember going like, wow, this is really fascinating and kind of makes me want to make something, but also I barely have an idea of myself as a human being because I'm barely like 11 or 12 at that time.
Sure.
Let's see what happens in a few years. And I remember being like 16 and being for like a day or two, just like, yeah, I'm gonna make comics. That sounds great. And then I smoked more weed and I was like, oh yeah, not yet. And then I'm about 21 or 22 and I just realized that I wanted to do something that would be purely rooted in myself as an art practice and wouldn't require me being in front of a lot of people at all times, because there are some instances where like I did music for a few years and it was great and it was actually a lot of fun, but it just was one of those things where either I would get very, very serious about it and I knew that was a path, but I kind of didn't feel like it was the right thing.
What did you play? Just out of curiosity.
I used to be kind of pretty embedded in like weird electronic music, very early dubstep back when it was actually good, around like 2004 to 2007, breakcore, like digital punk music basically, but enough that I could tour with other people who were usually about 20 years older than me and were like either like, who is this 18-year-old snot?
Right.
Who is raging all. So while 3 hours by train, not exactly something to do when you're a kid. But there was some access. Then there was secondary access, which was reading a lot of stuff on the internet and going, wow, this is cool, I want to read this, and kind of reading at least the criticism and kind of imagining what that might be, what certain things might be like. And I got pretty obsessive with that because I read so much criticism, art criticism as a kid, that I feel like that probably very deeply affected how I think about art and how I think about my own art too. It's 3 times as much important and would take 2 to 3 months to reach me.
Sure.
Which when you're 14 to 15 and you're 3 hours away and your parents would not even let you,
Right.
you basically don't have a chance.
Yeah.
And it was the combo of all that. And then as soon as I could, I started finding ways to, access comics in whichever way was possible and just grew from there.
So if you were pirating comics, were you pirating the European stuff you were seeing, the Egmont comics and the 2000 ADs, or were you pirating the American superhero comics?
Everything.
Everything, yeah.
Yeah, totally everything. But also I have a very strong policy, which is that if something is in print and I like it would get bought. And that was a thing that thankfully I feel like I developed pretty early, probably because while also being like on the edges of the music industry, that was the first place where that conversation was really happening.
Sure.
And because of being friends with so many artists, I immediately firsthand, I never had that thing, and that goes back to the criticism too, I never had that thing where I separated the artist and the art from the perspective of my enjoyment. It was always like, wait, somebody put their work into this, I can see all the people behind it. I need to make choices that are respectful of that.
Sure.
And then went from there. But like if there was a kid, like I remember in like 2012, there was Children just came out and there was this, guy about my age who came to me and was like, man, would you sign like this copy of Wild Children for me? I'm really sorry I pirated it before, but I want to buy it now because I was really poor at the time. And I was like, man, like, why would I care? It's completely okay. You were poor. Like when you're poor, first and foremost, figure out how to make sure that you're safe and you have, food and roof over your head, and pay it back later in all the other ways. And don't forget that artists are people, because I think that's how it all goes on.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's interesting too because I think that when you look at, say, Donald Duck comics, right? There's a certain corporate level to them where there's not necessarily individual artistry. There certainly is, right? Barks. There's many, many, many great duck artists, but there are, but they're not necessarily recognized at the time and in the place, And if you steal something, you're not stealing from the artist. You're stealing from the corporation, But that becomes very different when you start talking about, creator-owned stuff and material that is actually that matters to the person that makes it. It's the same in music, certainly, And if that's the only way you can access it, then that's the only way you can access it as a kid. I don't think that there's a problem with that. I give everybody a pass, like 16 and younger. Whatever you did, it's all fine.
100%.
It's all fine. Yeah. So when you were seeing these comics, I mean, obviously the world of American superhero comics is probably very different than growing up in the Czech Republic, I would imagine. Were these relatable to you? I'm fascinated by this because I know what it's like as an American to read these things, but...
I mean, they were relatable for a lot of different reasons. One, Czech Republic / Czechoslovakia was always a strange meeting point in terms of West and East. Down to the Soviet occupation, and before that, the Germans going through it during the Second World War. It's a place that's real right on the precipice if you look at like the Western-centric or Europe-centric maps of the world. And I think that there's this deep sense of maybe not quite understanding where people fit, where depending on who you ask, people will get upset when you either say that it's West or East.
Okay.
Well, to me personally, it's like, why not be both? You know, which it just seems like that's less of a problem. Like, why not accept both poles and then work with it, right?
Sure.
And the other thing is, you know, I'm very thankful that, especially when it comes to my mom, she always really encouraged me kind of learning everything and reading everything, and my dad too, to a decent extent. But my mom was always a massive reader, so a lot would come directly from her. And I think that from very early on, also because of the way the borders have changed, and because of the way I've seen governments change, like twice by the time I was 7, I've seen both literal occupation and then a breakup of the country that I was a part of. Right. And I, on top of that, grew up right on the border of Poland and Czech Republic. Yeah. Like, I could cross the border in 15 minutes if I was on a bike. My idea about how tightly people cling to identity through either statehood or race or a lot of other factors just kind of went out of the door very early on. Yeah. I was just like, wow, you really love pretending that this is like that the world is very solid, but it really is not. Yeah. And
well, in an unsolid world, what else can you do but to try to find something solid, right? Or that you think is solid.
Well, I think that there are two parts of that, right? Like, it helps when you find something, but I think that as long as you're looking for it primarily outside of yourself, you're not going to find it. Agreed. Because everything dies. Yes. And that's fine. That's not the end of life. That's just like part of life. Yeah. And I think a lot of people are really never really come to terms with the awareness, with like the conscious, constant awareness of death just being a part of the cycle.
Sure.
And so when there's anything that reminds people of that, they try to cling to the things that they already believe they know and that they believe should stay forever. Like, you know, and I've experienced that in many ways myself as a person throughout life. But I feel like that in a lot of ways really, between that and also just like divorce of my parents when I was about 9 or 10, which is like another way of like breaking that same boundary of like some things are just going to last forever. Oh, they might not. That doesn't mean they're good or bad. That just means that they're different. Right. A lot got erased and there was a lot of empty space. And I just went, well, why don't I just like, you know, without being fully conscious of it, I think at a time, why don't I look at the world as just gigantic chaos where things do sometimes make sense, but not necessarily as much sense as people like to think they do. Why don't I look deeper instead of trying to run away from the parts that unsettle me? Yeah. Yeah.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. What brought you to the United States? Was it school or?
No. I met a girl in Paris and then I ended up getting married within like 3 months. It was kind of like a bit of a whirlwind. We actually met on the Warren Ellis Forum back in like 2008. Ah,
the WEF.
Yeah. Warren occasionally loves to take credit for it, and he's not wrong, technically speaking. Yeah. He doesn't take credit for the divorce, which is weird.
It's your fault, Warren.
It's It's not. Thank you. I'm grateful for my first marriage. No, it was kind of like that. It was just like, oh wow, well this feels like the right thing to do, and I have no idea what I'm doing, but also, like, we're in love. Let's do it and let's see.
Sure.
And I came here for like 3 months, and then we just ended up being like, okay, well, let's do that then. Like, it was funny. It was actually just like, I think both of us were like, okay, maybe we should ask each other. And there was like her mom who was just like, so are you two going to get married or what? And we're like, okay. Yeah. And that was it. And I was working on, on some pitches. And I think I had like my first graphic novel together, but it was just the thing that I kind of needed to write to prove to myself that I had the steadiness of being able to work on something week in, week out, and that I could actually aim for doing this as a day job in a way that would be consistent. And it turned out that I was.
What made you think you could do comics? I don't mean that in a like what the fuck is wrong with you way, but like what made you think that I could do that?
It'll be also valid. You know, the key part of that question that I need to answer for myself was not what makes me think I can do that in the way of like, this seems like an, you know, some sort of a massive mountain, which it was. But I had this sense of, because I had the sense of like, well, artists are just people. It takes work and it takes trying it, and maybe it will work out and maybe not. But the really important question to me that I needed to answer for myself, and why I didn't do it sooner, why I didn't decide before I was 21 or 22, was, do I feel like I actually have something to say?
Sure.
Which I think sometimes people don't think about nearly enough. And sometimes even I forget about it. And I never should, really. And when I was about that age, I went, you know what? I went through some shit, and I have a feeling that the comics I can start making right now, based on the things that I'm writing right now for myself, are not like anything else I'm seeing, though they have similarities in ways where I can trace it back to a few different people and a few different works of art that make me really deeply grateful for their existence.
Yeah.
So why don't I try to pay that forward and do that same thing for some other kid who might be really lost at some point in their life and might look at a comic and go, wow, this helped me right now. You know, whether that's, you know, being sick when you're 3 years old, or I don't know, like, you know, being a depressive, suicidal teen when you're 16, you know, both of which I've gone through, and both of which, when I thought about it, I was like, oh, well, you know, comics. Yep, that helped. Yeah, that's where it started.
Your first comic, as I recall, tell me if I'm wrong here, was Wild Children?
Yes.
Yeah. So how did that come about?
Creatively or publishing-wise?
Well, I mean, aren't they sort of the same thing in a way? You come up with an idea, you've got to figure out how to get the idea out there. So,
Yeah, a bit of a way.
I mean, ideas are the easy part, aren't they?
I think ideas, for me, ideas are the easy part, figuring out which ideas actually hold up the scrutiny of like continued work and can be mined into something really useful and something that matters and keeps you interested long term, for me at least. That's where the real work comes in. But also having ideas in the first place, like having ideas that are good, that means that you need to be feeding yourself. You need to... If you don't want to make junk food, you can't spend majority of your time eating junk food. Which doesn't mean that junk food is bad. Love Shake Shack from time to time. If you ever want sponsorships,
Shake Shack.
Shake Shack. Love Shake Shack. Love
The
Netflix.
New World presents.
And so with Wild Children, I think I had that idea in maybe like 2009 or 2010, and I remember, I think it partially came out of Bowling for Columbine, and specifically, I mean, there was an articulation of something that was already, I think, pretty widely shared by most of people who sort of were still kids around the world, but especially in the US, and I was already pretty deeply kind of, you know, feeling the same things because I was consuming the same things and kind of trying to stay interested in the world overall. And there was the scene where they were talking with Marilyn Manson, who ended up kind of like being one of the people that ended up being blamed for Columbine for a bit. And I remember him kind of going like, they asked him what he would say to the kids, right? If he could somehow like make them stop.
Yeah.
And he pretty much responded with, I don't think I would say anything. I think I would try to listen to them. Mm-hmm. And that hit a very particular spot, and I think that Marilyn Manson's a very complicated human being that there's plenty of reasons to dislike him, but that was one really deeply felt thing to me. And I went, yeah, this makes me feel something very specific, and I don't feel we're culturally talking about it. Mm-hmm. What is the way to make people talk about it? What is the way to tell people that somebody is paying attention in a way without beating them over the head with a work that says something very simplistic that we all already know, like maybe definitely a bad comparison, but Grand Theft Auto isn't really known for having a pro-police message.
Right.
Because there's no point. It's a work of fiction.
Sure.
The same way Wild Children is a work of fiction.
Sure.
But there is way for art to sometimes be a little bit of a grenade. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what happened, both for me writing it, because I've gone through 6 schools in 11 years and always hated school very deeply. Because I think that system is basically as it used to be and as it still largely is designed to create people who are supposed to be working in factories, and everyone who doesn't go that route is usually more or less a happy accident,
right,
or has really, really good parents and is lucky on top of that.
Yeah. Nobody works in factories anymore, though. That's the thing.
Well, that's the other part of hyper-capitalism that we're now hitting that everyone's going to have a huge problem with, but it's kind of too late. Yeah.
You're all doomed.
But the thing is, like the original route of designing public schooling back when Edward P. Cubberley and a few other people were figuring out how to design the modern industrialist era schooling was that.
Sure,
literally
absolutely.
explained in the books by them. And it was deeply distressing to me because growing up and going to school in Czech Republic was so specific in part because not only did I have to deal with that system, I also had to deal with a system where most of the teachers, unless they were very young and just coming in, were dealing with their own like stops and doors they had to keep shut because they couldn't talk about certain things because of the government before that.
Sure.
They couldn't teach things they would want. They had to teach fake news. Like they had to teach you the history that Soviet Union wanted you to learn at the time. I'm not saying that American history is necessarily all that much better. History, is at least for a little bit of time written by the supposed winners.
Yep.
But seeing that and seeing how people struggle with that on all levels was immensely influential. And when I was writing Wild Children, I was able to sort of look at myself and go, wow, you were really deeply traumatized by that time.
Yeah.
It's good that you're talking about it, baby, because you really need to.
Yeah.
And I didn't have enough money for a good therapist back then, so that was extra effective.
Yeah. So how old are you here? You're 22, 23?
Yeah,
right?
about 22 when I had that idea,
Yeah.
25 when it came out.
You're a little tiny child.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
essentially.
Yeah.
So how do you get published as a little tiny child? How does that work?
Well, there were about, since like 2008 to 2011, I would study everything there was.
Yeah.
On whether it's the comics themselves, whether it's all the literature I could. On the internet, books, whatever, whenever I could, I would just study. I would really put myself kind of through it and put myself through my own school, which was much better because I found out that I actually totally had willpower, which I was told I didn't have. It wasn't that I didn't have willpower, it was that I didn't believe in learning things I was told I needed to learn unless I genuinely felt like I needed to learn them.
I see it. Okay. Okay.
And I started having a better sense of the publishing landscape. I started having a better sense of the history, not just the immediate history, but the history going all the way back, whether we're talking cave paintings or whether we're talking American publishing. And as those things started to combine, I started writing up pitches.
Right.
In addition to experimenting with the art form itself. And then I occasionally would go, well, I think this is good enough. And this ran through, 5 drafts. And it also ran through people that are close to me who think it's worth a shot now. I kind of trust it. I'm going to reach to an artist that I respect, who seems like they might be actually willing to return an email.
Yeah.
And see if maybe somebody's going to be interested in working with me. And if I save some money, I might commission them to do 2 or 3 pages for the pitch.
Yeah.
So that took about 2 years of consistently trying that and being professional, but also not succumbing to the defeat, and also getting offers to get published and then saying no because they were not the right offers.
Okay.
And occasionally, when somebody comes to you and they're like, we're not going to pay you and we're going to own 75% of what you do, but you're going to get published, you know that that's a bad offer and you shouldn't be taking it.
Sure, sure.
And there
Out
was
of
a lot
curiosity, can you say who that was? Or
I
mean, statute of limitations is up at this point, I think.
I will not, because,
Okay.
history already caught up with enough of them
Okay,
that I'm
okay.
like, why was the point?
Yeah.
And
I'm just curious because that,
yeah, no, it's like I feel like naming names is absolutely worthwhile when it's like an ongoing thing where people are unwilling to change
Sure,
their
sure.
behavior. But that was part of it. And then the other part was sometimes the artists would return the email and we would start talking, and sometimes we would just realize that doesn't work, and the other times they would be like, maybe, and let's try, and then a year would pass by. But a few times we figured out that there was something there. And so we made these pitch packages. I ended up with this 50 or 60 page PDF that had work from Dan Hipp and Ryan Kelly and a couple other artists, and it was 7 or 8 pitches, including Wild Children, without Riley Rossmo, who ended up being the artist. And I went to the Seattle Comic Con basically being exhausted and not having money and being just okay, I'm gonna try a little bit longer, but I'm just about done. And then I ended up meeting, I ended up meeting Joe Keating, who used to work at Image in marketing.
He was the marketing director, yeah.
Yeah, and Joe went, holy shit, this is really good. You have work by these artists who are already proven. I should introduce you to Eric Stevenson at Image because nobody does this. This is, and I was like, well, yeah, nobody does this, but also when I said nobody does this, nobody paid attention or everyone was very unprofessional.
Right.
But I am absolutely happy to try this.
Right.
And I went and I showed it to Eric, and Eric went, well, do you want to publish 2 of those books? I was like, okay. And that was that. And Eric said, hey, we have a book with Riley Rossmo that's coming to the end. I really want to work with him again. Do you guys want to talk about maybe working together on this one? And I went, well, that sounds like a great idea. I like his art. Let's see what happens. And that ended up being Wild Children. And the other book that got greenlit ended up not getting published because it was just a matter of me realizing that I didn't want to make it anymore. But we just switched that for a change, which ended up being the second book. It just kind of went from there.
But it's a little insane that you're 22, 23, and you get a book at Image as your first comic, right? I mean, that's a little insane, right?
I mean, yeah, and very lucky, but also after 4 to 5 years of work where I think I could have had work published by 4 or 5 different publishers, and then there were 4 or 5 who would be either not paying attention or wouldn't be the right fit, etc., and then other possibilities. But what I remember the most, besides hearing no a whole lot, was also occasionally having to go, wait, this is not good enough. Because either I'm being asked to change something that I genuinely believe is really crucial to the book, and I don't believe that I should be coming out with my first thing and have my name on it and already feel like I'm compromising here. Yeah, just saying no is sometimes really underrated, and I think there's ways in which we sort of condition ourselves to doing that in a lot of ways in our lives. And for me, it was especially something where I think very often I would give other people kind of more space than I would give myself. Like, I wouldn't look shy. I don't seem to be shy, generally speaking, but I could be not just even shy, but just like not even know fully. And I learned how to say no. I think I started learning how to say no properly around that time.
Sure. But to place your first book at Image, of all publishers, the most creator-owned publisher of all, that at least on paper at least is the ideal circumstance.
Yes.
Is kind of crazy, isn't it? At that young age, I mean, did you realize what an opportunity that was, or was it just like, oh no, this is what I deserve?
I mean, I didn't believe that it would happen until it was literally in my hands at that point. Like, there were so many near misses and so many things where I was just like, fuck, I'm so exhausted. This is not going to work out possibly ever.
Yeah.
That I genuinely don't think I believed it. First, I was like, okay, this seems like it's going well. And then it was like, okay, now it's 2 months before release. I need to believe in this despite there being a lot of voices in my head and sometimes even around me telling me this is not going to work out. I quit my job 2 months before the book came out because we got the word on pre-orders and it was pretty healthy. And I went, okay, I'm going to do the numbers, and if the orders make this number and I am on unemployment for the next 6 months, I can swing making a second book during that time and bet everything on the fact that the first 2 books are good enough that they're going to do something for me. And that ended up happening. I don't think it would have happened at all if it wasn't for a whole lot of people, whether collaborators or, people who were around me at the time who very deeply backed me. But God, it was like so many nights of just like going like, I am probably completely insane because how is this going to work now when it didn't work out so many times before? And the other part to that question is, back in the 60s and 70s, you had people making comics when they were sometimes 15, 16 and going up into their mid-20s and 30s.
Sure.
And I think that that's one crucial thing that we lost as an industry that makes the industry less vibrant and interesting. Because if you have 30 or 40-year-old men writing superheroes, it's not that it's intrinsically worse or better.
Sure.
But I would prefer that majority of that is written by people who really benefit from imagining power fantasies and exploring them in ways that are truly, genuinely innovative.
Sure.
And I don't think you can do that as well when you're relatively privileged and kind of usually at least partially well off, because frankly, most white dudes in comics are, if they're writing Marvel and DC, at least okay.
Okay.
They might be doing great, but they're not a 15 or 16-year-old in Ohio.
No. I'm just trying to parse through that because I'm not sure that they're doing okay other than working to the bone to make themselves okay,
Oh yeah, but it's a difference between, if you're anywhere between 15 and 25 right now, getting paid what you would get paid for writing an issue of Marvel comic.
Sure.
Changes your life not for a month, but possibly for 3 to 4 if you're willing to really like work for it,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
And that's the economical difference that I think is important.
But the economics of an Image deal is very, very different than
absolutely,
work for hire.
Yes.
And so I'm sort of curious because your first experiences were at what is theoretically the top end of you can get as a creator.
Yeah.
Right? So it seems to me that it's kind of a change to go from that to creator-owned work, right? Do you know what I'm saying at all, or am I not making any sense?
No, I'm paying attention. Go on.
Yeah. Well, I thanks. I don't know that I've parsed this out until I'm talking about it out loud. But like you're the lessons that you're learning as a creator-owned person at Image, and what you have to do, and the number that you have to achieve, and the things you have to do to get there, are very different than the work for hire experience. You know.
Yes.
So, do you think that breaking in through Image so young was good or bad for you for your creative endeavors further on? Like, did it give you an unrealistic expectation? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I think that because I paid really close attention to the economics of the business and the history of the business, I had a fairly healthy understanding of what the economics will likely play out to with work for hire and with doing creator owned, and then doing this, working in the space in between.
Right.
And that meant kind of being more aware both of the risks and also, you know, the possible value of saying yes to certain projects or so on. I mean, I'm really happy it happened the way it happened. Like,
sure,
I don't.
no,
it's what you said. I don't think that there's, honestly, I can't see a more ideal way for me
Anyone.
to express myself at that time with that particular book. Like, it feels like it somehow all managed to click.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes maybe like looking back, it looks like, oh, very like, you know, deliberate in a way. But God, it was like, if it was deliberate, wow. Like, that took a lot of work.
Sure.
Not even making it look that way, but making the final thing feel like it's such an expression.
But it also seems to me that like by doing your first work at Image, it almost makes a Dark Horse, a Boom, an Oni so much less attractive, right?
Yes.
Because you've batted at the World Series essentially, you know? Like you've gained everything you possibly can gain from your work on your first time at Deck. That seems like that's a pretty changing experience.
Oh, I mean, it was completely life-changing.
Yeah.
Not in the way of like, you know, it didn't mean that I suddenly was set up for a year or anything like that.
Did you make any money on?
We made enough money to, like, for me it was enough money to, together with unemployment, live for the next 6 months. It was tight.
Hand to mouth, yeah.
Yeah, but like I literally never want to see tuna in a can again in my life. I haven't had it since 2012, and I will never. Like that and rice and figuring out how to use some kind of spice to not make it taste the same every day of the week was a hard thing. But I probably got mercury poisoning out of it. But yeah, like, and I wouldn't recommend it to anyone else. Like, I don't think that there's necessarily the way. I think people sometimes fetishize hard work. I think that it worked for me because I kind of can be very stubborn.
Yeah.
And I think at that point especially, that was sometimes at the expense of my own health. But was it completely reaffirming and life-changing and something that just like completely altered everything that happened after? Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. So I wonder broadly about the production of comics under the Image model and how that works for authors as opposed to cartoonists, right? Because it's clearly a different thing. My general understanding of things, and please tell me that I'm off on this at all, is that usually the writers are financing the work. They're paying a page rate to the artists. They're paying that out of their own pocket on the hope that the book will make its money back on the back end. Is that generally a correct experience?
I honestly can't speak for other people.
Sure, of course.
Because I'm so not in the industry for majority of it. Like, I think this is the only appearance that I've made this, like, in the past 12 months, possibly.
Right.
And majority of my friends, you're so welcome. And the majority of my friends and people who are close to me are not people who are in comics.
Sure.
I did that sometimes when I was putting together the pitches, because at that time I just took it like, well, this is the price I have to pay for working with a professional when I myself am not yet a professional.
Right.
And then on the first book or two books, it was the kind of a situation where I was like, look, I'm new to this. What do you want to do? I feel like the bare minimum is we split, equally, and then see if you need more, we can try to figure out a way to make something happen. But also, like, if you can't pull it off, that's okay.
Sure.
And thankfully, I was blessed with creators who were like, no, we're both taking a risk, and I really like your writing. Let's do this. Let's have a really good experience.
Okay.
And
so you weren't going out of pocket necessarily.
I was going out of pocket before I got published, and then once I was able to prove with like Wild Children, well, there's going to very likely be some healthy amount of starting sales.
I see, okay.
It ended up being a situation of, well, now it seems like we don't need to, but also like if we need to, then I think I can provide a certain small, amount. But like,
and
no,
so you
widely.
say there's an expectation of a certain level of sales. Has that expectation been met throughout your career? I'm sorry if that's like too personal of a question. I'm just trying to, because I think one of the things that these videos are good for is people looking to make a career in comics and to understand what the parameters really are, right?
Yeah.
Because I think we talk about this stuff in very, very vague ways.
Yeah.
And we sell people a bill of goods, I think, a lot of times, I think that there's a lot of people who are doing creator-owned work, not necessarily for image, but who are doing creator-owned work where they never make any money, ever, where they're pouring money into it,
yes,
on the hope that someday that they'll be rewarded. And I don't think we talk about that as an industry enough.
Yeah, I mean that goes back to, I remember like the first slew of like big pieces about me back in 2012 when Wild Children came out, and all of a sudden like there was like LA Times and like I don't even remember what, like, but like a lot of really good outlets were suddenly paying attention, which was like from 0 to 100.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was kind of done out of groundwork that I just, did in my free time by sending out copies and kind of being like, hopefully some people will respond.
Sure.
And when they did, sometimes the writers would kind of try to frame it a little bit as in like the American dream, the self-made artist. And I was like, let's not. Because the American dream literally does not work. It's already been shown. It doesn't work for majority of people. Doing this is just basically promoting hyper-capitalism. Sure. If you do it that way, that's not how it works.
Well, I would say the
the
American dream is not hyper-capitalism. The American dream is the opposite of hyper-capitalism, right? The American dream is, I have $10,000, I open a comic book store, That's the American. Well, that's not the American dream. Nobody wants to own a comic book store, but you know what I mean, right? Like you start with nothing. It's the Horatio Alger thing, right? That's not hyper-capitalism. Hyper-capitalism is about exploiting the worker for the benefit of the corporation, as far as I'm concerned. Wow, I'm sorry.
Yes, no, this is great. No, this is great. I'm loving the energy. Yeah. I don't think that those two are separate. I think that those two get very quickly and very tightly connected, even by the process of, for example, where are my books getting printed and how much are the people printing them getting paid.
Sure. I just feel like the people who I respect, who are artists, who are creators, who are builders, don't give a shit about the corporations. I mean, the corporations end up eating it, because the corporations take a taste of everything and eat our souls in the end.
Hi, Netflix.
Even if you don't work for the corporation, hi, Netflix. But at the end of the day, I mean, the American dream is individualism,
yes,
and you individually making your mark. And I think that's the problem with the American dream, is that it's not actually possible for the
Yes.
overwhelming majority of people. They never get the opportunity to even get their foot in that door.
Yes.
You know?
And nobody works in a vacuum, so any idea of like a self-made man or woman is intrinsically bullshit because you just do not exist in a vacuum.
Sure.
You are always, it's always on like the backs and shoulders of other people. And the ideal scenario is that you do that for each other,
Yeah.
and there's a level of balance in
Yeah.
that. But in order, and that goes back to the thing about dealing with Image. I thought for a very long time before getting that offer that Image had the best deal in comics, precisely because I went, well, they are kind of giving people the space to organize and make their own thing
Yeah.
and set their own rules, and
Yeah.
they are not greedy.
Yeah.
And that to me was really important.
Sure.
But then when somebody tries to frame you as, oh wow, here, look at it, it's 2012, the recession is over because a Czech immigrant who is white and passes for straight male succeeded in an industry dominated by white straight males. Holy shit, that's
Right.
so surprising. Like, wow, the
Sure.
bare minimum. And I was really disgusted by that, because as much as I was thankful for my own success, I don't want, that's like Esquire putting a white 16-year-old kid from Midwest on their cover saying that nobody listens to white boys during the Black History Month in 2019, which is literally what just happened. Like, I didn't want to be that person.
Sure.
So
Sure.
I was very cautious and very careful of that, because I think that there's a lot of ways in which once you become a public person, unless you're in control of your image will be used until there's nothing to be used anymore.
Sure. Sure.
Hi, Amazon.
So the math of creator-owned, and obviously it varies dramatically from project to project. It'll vary to a certain extent from publisher to publisher. But is the math such that you could do without serialization and just do the book? Because this is certainly a thing that people call for all of the time. And from my side of the counter, it just doesn't work, because I see what most books sell. Most books sell a copy the month they come out, and then you might sell 3 more copies in the next year, right? That's how a graphic novel works, right? Like at OGN. Whereas a periodical comic, you'll sell 50, 100, lots of copies, and then you'll also sell the book, which has been supported by the periodical going back.
Yes.
Am I off base on any of this? Say yes, it's fine.
I mean, one, you're the retailer, and you generally, from everything I understand, including reading, your column, which has been going out for a while now, and which I read back before I became I think even, how long has it been now?
I've been writing it for 30 years. I
definitely read it before I was a creator,
I've been writing it for 3 decades is what I like to say. I wrote it in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. Oh, I'm on 4 decades now, aren't I? Wow, I'm old. Wow. But that doesn't mean I'm right.
No, not always. But I think that you very often take a long-term view of the industry in a way that people.
Well, I'm trying to figure it out,
do.
right? Like
Yeah.
because we have a lot of mythology about how comics work, right? And I feel like a lot of it's nonsense and a lot of it's lies. And so, like, it's really important for us to cut through what's true, what's not true. And so I guess one of the reasons I'm trying to ask you about creator-owned and creator-owned in the most ideal situation is, how often are you earning out on your books? Have you earned out on every one of them? I mean, obviously, probably at this point you have, because the fullness of time, but
yeah, I mean, mostly, occasionally there would be a single issue where we would go into red, but that would be like usually with projects where we kind of would take a risk. Like, I think with material, it was always, I like warned everyone before we started making it that I think it might not sell well, but I think that it will be something we'll be really proud of, and that I feel like I need to make if everyone else wants to make it.
Yeah.
And so I think we ended up in red by like chapter 4, and then the trade was in red, I think maybe like last year or this year. But the thing is, people still buy it, people still read it and come back to it, and it's something that doesn't really have an easy hook or easy sell. With majority of the books, I think that you can make money. I think that there's a few things that people don't talk about enough. I think that there's a wide-scale global failure of marketing in the American comics industry.
Absolutely.
Where nobody really focuses on how important marketing is. So people don't even get to fail right when they market stuff. They just get to fail before they even start.
Well, the overwhelming majority of marketing in comics is, it comes out this Wednesday.
Yes.
You know, and people walk into the store, like literally, people ask me this all the time, like, how do people find out about comics?
Yes.
Because they walked into my store on Wednesday and they saw what was on the rack.
Yep.
That's the way that they know about comics.
Yes.
Which is a huge problem. There's no other creative industry that acts like that I can think of, at least.
I think it's like almost a combination of... If I'm reading history correctly, and I might not, but my partial sense is that first, like, if we're going back to just 80s, let's say. So after this period of kind of everyone being into comics for a bit, at least when we're talking Marvel and so on, there was this period of like a little bit of a free fall. And you end up in a place where then people, at one hand, the Comic Cons are small and everything, but also people start noticing, wow, there's some really cool stuff happening. You know, you get a lot of interesting stuff, and I'm just talking Western comics perspective right now for simplification. And you get this simultaneous sense, or at least I get that sense, that people weren't really sure whether they were like good enough to think of themselves as parts of global culture. But also at the same time, there were some things that were made during that time that absolutely became that. You know,
well, but the important part is that global culture was telling us at that time, you're not good enough. It's not just that we thought that. Like, we were literally being told, no. I mean, I always think about when Sandman got nominated for whatever it got nominated for, like one of the literature awards.
I think Bram Stoker Award.
And they immediately changed the rules so that a comic could never win again. And that was the traditional way that it was dealt with then.
Which I think honestly. That's in part perfectly fine, because comics to me are not literature, they're comics, and there's no reason for them to, for us to try that. I think it goes back to the failure of marketing. I think there's a lot of things that's completely wrong with the Oscars. One thing you can say is that a person on the street will not know what an Oscar is. If you ask a random person, ask 10 people about what Eisner Award is on the street, and nobody will be able to tell you. Why is that? Because nobody really thinks that it's important enough to market well. And also because there's literally no marketing budgets at publishers. Like, if there are, it's Marvel and DC, and they go with very traditional marketing unless you really push hard when you're there as a creator and get both lucky and also just literally will be like as clear about what you want as possible.
And we have this weird thing where the general public still confuses genre and medium.
Absolutely.
That Bill Maher rant is sort of your perfect example, where he was going on and on and on about this thing, where he was actually right about the things that he was saying, but he conflated it into... in terms of the foolishness of the superhero paradigm, and it's an immature view on the world. Right, I think he's right about those.
Talk about broken clock.
Absolutely, exactly, broken clock, right? But he was confusing medium and genre. He was thinking that comics were superheroes, and they never are. But the general public still believes that to a large extent.
Well, I mean, he's also a moron who could literally like put a light bulb on and find his own ass, even if somebody pointed it out. But that's just Bill Maher.
Hi, HBO.
And but beyond that, So yeah, we pointed out the failure of marketing. Then you get the 90s and you get the sense of simultaneously people are starting to pay attention, but also comics kind of hit a massive low in terms of sales in the industry and in terms of the, near annihilation of the industry for a bit.
It's not anywhere near that. Even in the 90s, it was never anywhere near what it's like today. Because comics, so the difference between today and now is that Amazing Spider-Man used to sell 160,000 copies.
Yes. Now it sells what, 70?
70 at best. Yeah. It's like half of what it used to sell.
Why do you think that is?
That's a fundamental problem. Well, why do I think that is? I think that's because there's too much comics being published. Spider-Man, in the month of January, had 12 different comics come out. Spider-Man, just Spider-Man. So that's 3 a week. Of course, they don't come out 3 a week because Marvel can't fucking schedule like a normal place, right? So you get like some weeks 6 comics fucking come out that all have Spider-Man in them, and people are like, well, I don't know what Spider-Man comic I want. I like Spider-Man, but I can't choose between Peter Parker and Superior and regular Spider-Man, which is published twice a month, and yada, 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 yada. Nobody wants to hear me rant, so I'm going to stop this now. But that's the fundamental problem. That's the fundamental difference between then and now is that Marvel, especially, and DC, have oversaturated their lines to try to grab every single dollar that they can rather than trying to maximize the dollar that they get. It's as though they made the new Spider-Man movie, but they made 15 different movies that they all released in a month.
Gotcha.
Right? Everybody would go, but I don't want to watch all of that. I'm not interested.
What are you talking about? It's so much content.
Yeah. So much content is not good. Too much content is bad, actually. And I think that that's actually probably the one lesson from the internet era, I guess I would call it, is that there's too much content. You cannot keep up with it. And so differentiating your content and marketing becomes the single most important thing you can do as a creative person.
That makes perfect sense to me. I also wonder if it's, I love Marvel Studios as far as the film and TV goes. I wonder if, like, with Marvel Publishing, there might also be some confusion in, like, why they're releasing so many things at once, because sometimes they, like, think that their editor-in-chief is Japanese and other times they think that he's American and that they can't quite tell. That
was mean. You're mean.
Oh, you mean there's just one?
Yes, there's just one.
Oh my.
Hi, Marvel Comics. All right. Before I go on to part 2 of this, do you guys have any questions about anything we've talked about, or just any questions in general? Is there something from the internet? Do we have people watching?
We do.
We have people watching. Hi, you're watching. If you'd like to ask a question, please ask a question. Miranda will give it to me. Anybody in the room? Yes, please.
I've got so many questions.
We'll start with one.
But with the New World specifically, I mean, you spoke about you can make something and a couple months later it's in someone's hands. Obviously, with this book, you're talking about borders, you're talking about walls, you're talking about ridiculous governments. I didn't know all of your history, and now the book feels really reflective of that. I read it as a Mexican American who grew up with a lot of racism and obviously living in the Trump era, and so to me it felt like a super American comic, and I was like, holy shit, this is great. This is like so many things I want. But how much of this is informed by who you have been, or versus what we're going through now? Because it seems like it could be both equally or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Well, I guess when did you even start working on it and the idea? Like, is this a result of where we're at now, or all sorts of shit?
It's like the chicken or egg question, like with like, oh, is this fate, or is this like, or do you like make your own fate? I don't think that there's a correct answer besides just like both things influence each other at all times, in perpetuity. I started working on this. Well, Trad and I knew that we wanted to work together on a book since we did the second issue of Zero in 2013. And just were like, this is great. And then we had all the covers for Secret Avengers and started kind of workshopping what a book would look like if we wanted to do a book. And then in 2015, I started writing it. It went through a few different permutations, and Trad, was very good about sticking with it when I tried to figure out how to make it good enough, because I felt like it wasn't quite good enough yet. And then by 2016, he started drawing, and then we slowly worked forward. And so those elements were there before, the current government. And the thing about art for me is that art is also therapy for me, but I don't want it to be the kind of a therapy where I'm not conscious of the person that's on the receiving end of what I'm doing. So if art is communication, that I want that communication to be rewarding, and in order for it to really be rewarding, I need to make sure that it comes from myself and from places that I need to explore, but I also need to explain them in a way that's broadly universal enough at the same time. I think that in order to do that right as an artist, you need to consciously focus, at least that's my experience, on growing as a human being. And that can take, really a ton of forms, but that's been kind of the one constant, where I sometimes almost felt like I was undercutting myself at certain points of my life, because I would be like, well, I'm not that person anymore, I want to do something else, or, I feel like the things that I identified with a year ago are suddenly no longer interesting to me, and learning to stay in a place that would simultaneously kind of be consistent, but also non-judgmental about the fact that the world changes and you change if you are present with yourself and with the world, was kind of crucial to learning how to make that. And, I feel like up until 2017, even 2018, I was in the first phase of my career almost as a writer, when I was really starting to figure out how to write, but I wasn't really sure if I had a voice. I knew that I wanted to try things, and I knew that I could find a voice depending on the book and go somewhere, but it was all so deeply exploratory that it always felt like kind of diving off a cliff. And now I feel, and this connects to both doing all that work, but also doing a lot of self-work, and also going to a shitload of therapy. I kind of feel like I can actually hear myself for the first time in a very long time, in a way that's clearer and that connects back to both that personal stuff and to things that I draw from, that you might be able to make connections to based on what I was talking about. But then I also got better at articulating them. And I got better at communicating them to people with other perspectives, because I learned so much about the world in the meantime. It's also like I'm going to clock 10 years in the US. That meant a completely radically changing scenario for me as a human being in terms of kind of really everything. Like Czech Republic is predominantly heavily white place. Like America is anything but. And the fact that you know that even before is completely different than living in it and feeling validated by being in a place where you're not different in certain ways that you might be. Like that would be specific to like being queer in Czech Republic. That was a freaking nightmare for most part. Or, or just like having friends who are either of other race or, might be in some way non-conforming. Like that was that was a rough thing, and I'm like very happy that I'm not there anymore in a lot of ways. Doesn't mean that I don't come back, but it's not home. And as many problems as America has, it feels a lot more like that. And I think that with the New World, I kind of made sense of that. But I didn't know if I would until the final page. Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up? With that, the final page, I love the way it ends, and I don't think you need more or a sequel, but I kind of want a sequel.
Yeah.
I want to know where things go.
Yeah.
It would be perfect if we never heard from these characters ever again, or we're never in this world again.
The cat's still alive.
But yeah.
Cat's still alive.
I know it.
Love you, Emma.
Do you have plans for a sequel? And then also, and this just might be me seeing things I don't want to see, but Logan, Clark, the Transmetropolitan Glasses, the
totally a
Rage
reference,
Against
yeah.
the Machine lyrics, like it's loaded with all this, like, and I just wonder if that's, if you could talk about that. Sorry, that's actually 2 follow-up questions. My bad. I'll stop now. But.
Okay, well, so the second one first, and then you might have to remind me of the first one. Something that really seemed like a critique that was a little bit odd to me, but of course people can have it, is that people would sometimes criticize me for being earnest. And I went, that's a really strange criticism, because like, so you're saying that the references are taking you out of the story, or you're just saying that you are realizing that this was written by a person with a strong point of view? And there's legitimacy to both of those points of view, right? But it was something where I started thinking about it. I went, well, there's a very specific way in which people sometimes don't like art to function as a mirror, because if they feel enough of the real world, and sensing real world by either by reference or by getting uncountably close to certain things, like with wild children school shootings, kind of makes people go, that's not what I come to my entertainment for. And I'm like, well, it's not your entertainment, it's art. Like, that's literally what I'm here for. I want to make art. The fact that it's entertainment is another aspect of it, but that's not the only reason I'm making it for. And so much of the art and entertainment that I consume from very early on was political, whether subtly or whether very directly. So I felt like, especially, like, you can't get more direct than quoting Rage Against the Machine in a book through a character, because it says something about the earnestness of a character who totally believes every word, but then simultaneously he kind of gets criticized for the fact that he's kind of ideologue to the point where he doesn't actually see other people throughout the book a little bit. And I kind of liked how I was able to get to the point where I was like, I like that, because those reviews helped me with that. Like, those characters are all me. Like, there's, the things that I'm going through and processing are totally on the page. And I think earnestness is, in that specific way, kind of underrated and something I never really want to lose. Which doesn't mean that I want people to think about me when they're reading. That's very different. That's extremely egotistic and something that I think I'm sometimes kind of into, but not in a way where I actually feel like I'm really into it. It's more like you have to catch yourself and pull yourself back from the abyss, because that's a really strange place to be in.
And the other question was, are we going to get a sequel?
You might get something, but it's not going to be a comic book sequel. But you might get something, who knows? There's just like, follow me on Twitter, see what happens. Yeah.
Do you and Trad have any plans of working together again?
I mean, we're gonna talk in March, but I honestly couldn't tell.
Okay.
Yeah. It will depend entirely. I feel like this was such an intensive process of making the book. And like, I don't even mean that as like positive, negative, just like so intensive.
Sure.
Including me being late on issue 5. Mm-hmm. Then writing the entire issue in like 2 days while profusely apologizing to Trad, being 3 pages away from being done. And while I think I was FaceTiming shortly before I FaceTimed Trad, my laptop died.
Wow.
And I had to go to the store and buy a new laptop and rewrite it from memory in the next 2 days again.
Crazy, wow.
So I don't even remember how it changed from the previous version.
Yeah.
But that was literally what I needed to do. I think it made the story better, hopefully.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think it made it worse, because I don't want to even think about whether it made it better or worse, I guess.
Well, I'm super curious.
Definitely spiraling there. But anyway, the point being, I don't know yet.
I'm super curious about you and Trad and how you work together. And I mean, so I've always thought that Trad was like this amazing godlike artist.
Yes.
Like, from the moment I saw his first work, the first thing I remember is probably a Ghost Rider.
Yeah.
But it was like, this is so much better than Ghost Rider should ever be in a million years. But I feel like he really quantum leaped here in New World. I mean, I don't know if you feel the same way.
Yes, I do.
And I'm particularly thinking about sort of this 4-page sequence or 5-page sequence in the club.
Yeah.
That it just there's just elements to this that are just, how much of this is on the script and how much of this is, like we were talking before about time and space, right?
Yeah.
Like this page in particular,
Yeah.
I don't know if you can really see this on the screen or not, but like they're dancing and then they're fucking and then and there's little insets and it's kind of a pure expression of what comics is.
Yeah.
And so how much of this is from your script? How much of this is just Trad being a god?
I think that sequence boils down to a few very specific things. One is that up to that sequence, if you look at the first, I think about 35 to 40 pages of the book, they are very tightly structured.
Sure.
Like literally the first 20 pages or so mirror each other
Yes,
as
they
you
do.
go.
Yep.
And that was very much down to me and Trad going, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it, you know, foreground, middle ground, background, I'll describe everything. And then we got to that sequence. And I remember, and I really don't remember like how much, you know, actual writing there was involved, but I'm certain that it was nowhere near the amount of work that Trad put in. But I went, hey Trad, I feel like for this sequence what I should do is let go of the paneling and describe what happens on the page and make the writing itself inspire you to go in a direction.
Yeah.
So I tried to recall, you know, every time I was, you know, having a good time at a club or whatever I can describe that as.
Sure.
Which, I mean, yeah. I'm slightly censoring myself, but basically it comes down to like recalling a lot of really fun times.
Yep.
And then I went, how do you describe that to someone if you want them to feel the same way while they're reading the prose?
Yeah.
Because that's the only way to inspire the artist enough to find that and then transport that through their own influence and through the collaboration you've had up to that point. And you know, Trad nailed it. We went through the process of like, you know, him showing me the layouts, and I don't think there was a single change to that really. And I really like how it opens from that very structured type paneling, and it feels like it's suddenly exploded, and it comes after a scene that's incredibly traumatic and is like, and literally ends with a gigantic wall.
Yeah.
So you also get this emotional whiplash of seeing young people escape or try to escape, you know, traumas that they live with in the only way they know how.
Yeah.
Which, you know, very relatable 2019 content for anyone who woke up and looked at Twitter, or just lived. So that's kind of what was behind that. And then, you know, I think that those pages would have worked beautifully in black and white. I think the color completely changes them and adds so many more levels of feeling and not just passion, but also fun and there's a vibration to it that really feels like you're in a club. Like if you can hear the beat, it means that we've done something right. I can hear the beat when I look at it.
I can hear the beat as well. Yeah, no, I can. And there's something very masterful about the language of comics in terms of 6 panels, 3 panels, 4, and then 5, but it's a double page spread, and then it becomes a double page spread this way, and then it's all silent, and then it's not even, you don't even know what to call the fucking page, right? Like, because it's all like, there's like 25 panels on this page, but they're not even panels. I don't know, there's something masterful about this that, like, I love particularly the dance scene where everybody else is in shadow. They're not even in shadow, they're amorphous blobs.
Yes.
But you can recognize that they're people, and yet they're not people at all.
Yes.
And there's something, and then the center on them as they're dancing.
Yes.
This is magic. You couldn't do this in anything other than comics. You could make a similar feeling in
but not
film,
this way.
But not in this. Not in the way that this is a masterclass, I think. And so, can you take any credit for this masterclass, or is it Trad?
No,
okay,
I mean, I can't.
That's what I'm asking though, because I don't know. Sometimes, you know, you're like, yeah, go for it, you know, and then they woo you, you know.
No, I mean, yeah, sometimes you do that, but no. Even on like the level of color, sometimes I will say exactly that. I will be like, I trust you, go for it. Other times I will have a specific idea. I'm fairly certain that I remember correctly that the idea of making the color fall out around them for everyone except for them as they approach each other was something that I described in the initial script before the colorist even started on it. There's a million touches that Trad gave to the scene, whether small or large, that I didn't at all describe in the script.
Yeah.
It's the ideal space of collaboration where it merges so much that it becomes something larger than any one person, I think, in the process. Yeah.
I want to see you work with him more because I think you bring out the best in him. And I think he brings out the best in you, too.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
I mean, you've written many comics that I have liked very much, but this may be the first one that I fell in love with. And I don't even necessarily like the characters. It's not that I like Kirby or I like Stella because I think they're both fucking jerks.
Yeah, as you are when you are basically slightly grown up teenager. Yeah.
But there's something about this where you have cracked a certain code. The team of you together, working together, this is comics. This is what comics are supposed to be, in my mind. If every comic on the stands was this, we would not be having any conversations about comics have a problem. Do you know what I mean? And I'm not trying to blow smoke up your ass, brother.
I believe you.
I just really feel like this is just you've mastered your time and space in this.
I think it's kind of and thank you again, by the way. I think it's kind of like having a chance to work with the talent that Trad has on the art side is something that's incredibly rare. And also just the commitment to the quality of the work and frankly the obsessive quality that you have to have as an artist to do that. That's something incredibly rare. So I'm very, very grateful for that first and foremost. And no, I don't have anything profound to say apart from that.
Okay. All right. I mean, the thing I'll say, and I don't think this is telling tales out of school, I don't think, but Trad was originally supposed to be here, and he, we even started booking things, and then he was like, wait, no, I don't want to, because he was talking about how personal this was to his life.
Yeah.
And he didn't feel comfortable talking about it in public. And I get that, man, and all respect to you, brother. I mean, if you're watching this. I don't know. There's just something about this that touched me in a way, and I'm hoping you all agree. Yeah, that it was very, very different than, and I want to see more of this from you and from him, and I would love it if you guys could work together again, if you can achieve kind of this level of craft, because this is shiny. This is everything you want in comics. I think this is a perfect distillation of what we're trying to do in this club to expose people to comics and to the possibility of comics and the language of comics. It's amazing.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I think we all aim to make pop art.
Yeah.
I think that as much as pop is not a dirty word, art is not a dirty word, there's absolutely no reason why the two shouldn't be coexisting and really blow your mind in some way. I think that to me is what I want from comics and what comics are so beautifully and uniquely for.
Yeah.
So who knows? Maybe. I would love that.
Good. Do you guys have any more questions? Because I can keep talking, but we're also almost at 2 hours here. And I feel like I should probably start shutting this down. But do you have questions, please? Because nobody needs to hear me babble.
I have a quick question. You started talking about marketing, and you talked about your time working in the music industry and stuff. And it sounded like when you were starting out with your first pitch, you were trying to use some of the same tactics. Did you find yourself continuing that, as you went on with your career, or are you still sending issues out to the LA Times and random papers and finding a media outlet to help publicize this, or?
No, just give them a date and they have to wait in front of my house. And then I throw one issue and let them fight over it, and whoever wins gets the coverage. No, I'm so sorry. I hope nobody is listening. Love you all. Sometimes, but frankly, I kind of mostly don't have the time, and I feel like there's only so much responsibility that should be on creators for promoting their own work. And there's such a thing as a healthy level, and then there's what's unhealthy and is still expected, especially from creators in comics. And I think that that's not once you realize enough about like your own worth and your own health, I think it's really hard to go past certain limits. So I will be happy to do interviews. I will be happy to occasionally come to the store, or maybe do one Comic-Con in like 5 years. But that's because now I understand that my boundaries matter as much as actually more than like some levels of theoretical success I might get. Yeah. And I think that the journey to that is very different for every person. So there's really no dogmas to be said about that. But figure out what's healthy, figure out how to do it in a way that doesn't put the work second.
Oh, yeah.
Or if it does that for like a day, a week when you really need to, and then you can go back to the thing where you're really working on the thing itself. Yeah. That's kind of the balance I'm trying to hit, and I feel
sense because your time is valuable, and it's like, are you doing that creating? Are you doing that promoting? It's like you put it to where it makes most sense.
Yeah, and as long as we're going to pretend that we have marketing departments that are well funded in comics, which I don't think really have. We have marketing departments with people who are working hard with the minimum that they get, which is not nearly enough, which is a very different thing.
I don't think really hard.
Yeah,
but they're not. They don't. There's not enough hours in the day for them to do the thing that they need to do.
Absolutely, and it connects with the fact that they might have to promote an enormous amount of stuff, and you can't really put a decent marketing plan together if you're understaffed and you're putting out over a certain amount of books per month. It's just, regardless of the company, that's just not how it works. But I think that we don't talk about that enough in comics, and so we miss a crucial opportunity on how to actually access more long-term readers and access more people of every age, honestly.
Yep.
And I would love for that to see change. Yeah, but I'm not starting a marketing company at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we've made some level of changes. I think comics that are aimed at kids, like that, we've cracked that nut in a very interesting way. That it cracked without, I don't know, I almost feel like we fell backwards into this. Like, we walked away from it and then it walked itself back or something.
I mean, is it in part because traditional book publishers with actual, like, relatively well-funded marketing departments have done a lot of groundwork on that?
I mean, I would say yes, except that I feel like, perhaps wrongly, that they fell backwards into it. Nobody set out to go, we're promoting comics. It was, this bone thing. What can we do with this? Can we sell this at the book fairs? We do book fairs, right? Will people buy this? Wait, they're going to buy it? Mm-hmm. Oh my God, they're buying a lot of copies. Holy shit, we need to produce a whole lot more material like this.
Yeah.
Oh my God, Raina Telgemeier, she's really fucking talented. Wait, we've got a second book, and so it became like that. I don't think that there was any organized plan at any point of we're promoting comics and this is a thing we're building. I think that they fell backwards into it. That's my belief and impression of that. And now a lot of people are going, there's gold in them thar hills, and they're all running out with the pickaxes,
Where is it?
Well,
can you point me in a direction?
It's on the kids' rackets over there. Yeah, no, there's a lot of gold.
No, yeah, I agree. I agree.
And because and it's interesting because a lot of it happened because of a cultural change from librarians. It used to be that school teachers and librarians thought that comics would rot your brain, and then they started recognizing that the kids who were having trouble responded to comics in an amazing way, and then they went, wait, hold on, what were these theories we had about comics, right? Like, they thought that it was a bastard bullshit medium, and then they realized it was not, and now they are our greatest ally.
Yep.
Teachers, librarians, they are what is going to make comics. Comics is fine in 20 years from now because we have so many good kids comics being published right now that the kids reading those comics, when they grow up and they start making comics, oh my God, I cannot wait to see 15 years from now when someone reading Smile has grown up and processed that and articulated that and internalized that and then externalized that. And comics are going to be so good come 2035, you know? Or maybe a little earlier. But you know what I mean, right? Like, because
Hopefully earlier.
Because because they're learning the language young in a way that we skipped 2 or 3 American generations of.
Yes. I can see that. I would also add that part of that is also on comic book stores. When is the comic book stores who have decided that because they're paying attention to the trends and also because they don't want to pander to a limited amount of customers, that they actually open up and decide to attract.
But it wasn't until the teachers did it that we had that. The door didn't crack.
Yes.
Like, now I'm like running through that crack as far as I fucking can because we need to, you know? You had a question, Cameron. Go ahead.
Like, just being like a library monitor since I've been like 13.
Sure.
I don't think that we're that far removed from seeing these young these people, like, you know, really embracing this thing.
Yeah.
Because it's like, that's not the case. It's not 2035. We're going to see a lot of this.
We're already seeing it.
No, we're already seeing it.
I agree.
It. Like, no, like
Sure.
In a different way, it's like, you know, they're still on like the ground level, but like we're looking at like the next like 4 or 5 years, honestly.
Yeah, maybe.
Absolutely.
But here's the only place that I'll argue with that is that traditionally, right, you like comics from 8 to 13 or so, and then you discover the opposite sex, or cars, or whatever, and then you stop paying attention to comics for 5 to 7 years.
It's a different thing, though, Brian.
Maybe. I would love it if it were a different thing. I would love it. I'm not sure that historically I believe it. Because I can point to 60 years of comics history before that where kids liked comics from 8 to 15, give or take, and then they stopped. I mean, it's always been the history.
60 years is not always.
No. And
Okay,
also,
well, it's
like,
always been the history of comics. That is pretty much the history of comics.
In America?
Yeah.
During the very limited amount of time.
Sure. It's not, comics are from the 30s and on
But
in
Brian,
America.
Yes.
like literally like going from the middle school, being a high school library monitor, and then working at a comic book store.
Sure.
It's like, no, it's I don't think that timeline.
I hope you're right.
No.
I'm just looking at the panoply of history.
Can I point something out about
Yes.
this? So I think that there's a core difference here, and I think it has a lot to do with how readership in comics changed in terms of gender and also in terms of race.
Yep.
I think that we've never seen the difference that there is until now, right? Not in those 60 years before.
Absolutely.
As that is changing,
This is like the last 5 years that it has changed in this dramatic, crazy way.
So now we're suddenly dealing with a lot more readers who are a lot better mentally adjusted than white teenage boys who were the majority of the readers in comics up until this point. Which is not to say, you know, I don't need to be not all menning here and say, oh, all teenage boys, white teenage boys are bad or whatever. But the point is, yes, majority of terrorists in America currently are white men.
Yeah.
There's a reason for that.
Yeah.
When you have growing majority of the readers be not that, and for that to be people, and mainly women, who are kind of better emotionally adjusted to just being themselves, because while dealing with a very hostile world, that completely changes their relationship to what they consume and what they feel like they can consume throughout their life, without there suddenly being stopgaps where they need to try to convince themselves or the world that they need to be something else.
Well, I'll also add to that traditionally comics have been about a very specific kind of power fantasy.
Yes.
Right? And so that power fantasy may not apply to people of different genders, people of different races.
It doesn't.
And it may not. I don't know. Yeah.
It doesn't.
It definitely doesn't.
What's being said. Basically, when you look at traditions of comics that have their seeds not in the American model, but in like European comics, Japanese comics that didn't start out with just the superhero trend, the narrowing to the white male demographic, they've had completely different usage patterns throughout their lifespan.
Sure.
They've had genres that we've never had. They've had comics extending back to young childhood and onwards to adult, much longer than we have, really.
Sure.
And they've had entirely different patterns of how the industry has developed. And I think we're just sort of starting to have that seeded here in the U.S. to a certain extent we had it in certain decades, but it sort of has withered previously.
Yeah.
But now we've got the book club model instead of the comic market being just the people who, like you said, come into the comic shop every week. It's people who are picking up comics from book fairs, people who are picking up comics from bookstores, people who are going down to Japantown to pick up their manga fix every month or something, people who are going to webcomics, really, to learn from that. Basically, people who are coming from entirely different places are bringing entirely different things to the industry and changing the industry to something that's going to be very
challenging the industry.
It really is.
Because like you see the publishers like really catering to like this old idea.
Well, to a certain extent, that a lot of the publishers these days are the people who were fans of the superhero comics back when they were kids.
Back when they were children, yes.
They're trying to make those same comics to give themselves the same feeling they had back
And
in
every
the day.
store owner, that's literally the definition of who they are. I mean,
No, and
you don't own a comic book store unless you're trying to recapture your childhood.
But there's a divide.
Some of us grew up and went,
No.
no?
No. There's definitely comic book stores who don't. I understand that still feels like it's the case, but it's not the case.
Well, right, but that's where your base comes from, I guess, is what I'm saying, right? Like, I'm not that same person anymore. I dressed up as Robin when I was 14. I would not do that now. I don't like those comics anymore. I like these comics, but I wouldn't have a comic shop unless I was that person and that was the thing that I created. But let me ask you a question on this topic, because to tie it to the book, neither Stella nor Kirby are white, traditional characters. How important was that to you? Was it important? Were you conscious about creating that, or was it just those were who the best people to live in the story were?
Both.
Okay.
All art is propaganda.
Yeah.
That's the end.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Very good.
Don't have a better answer than
that's
quoting Orwell.
That's a great answer, and that's maybe a great place to stop. Maybe. Yeah, I think it is actually. I think that's a good place to stop. I want to thank you guys for coming out. It's pouring just sheets of rain out there, and it's terrible, and no one wants to be here selling paper and paper objects, and we're talking about print. Jesus fucking Christ. So thanks to all of you. Thanks to you, Aleš, for coming out from another coast to be here and doing this, and yeah, taking the time to talk to us about this. I feel like we could talk for another 2 hours and we wouldn't even begin to scratch the surface. But comics are a better place for you, for having you in it, is what I mean to say. And I really, I mean, we try to pick what we think is the best book each month, but I really feel like this is an exceptional piece of work. If you're sitting there watching at home, you haven't read The New World, go out and buy this. It's a great piece of comicking. It's a great piece of Americana. It's a great piece to say where we're supposed to be and where we're going to be in the future and where we can be. And it's hopeful and it's wonderful and it's everything that a book should be. So this. Sunday, we've got the Kids Club and we've got Lincoln Pierce coming. Sunday the 17th, he writes Big Nate, one of the most popular kids comics. He's here for his new book, Max and the Midnighters. That's going to be fantastic. And then next month's Graphic Novel Club, oh my God, we've got Tom King and Mitch Gerards from Mr. Miracle. This fantastic book. Oh my God, this is a great book. You guys who are here are going to be able to get the book tonight and the book plate. The book plate is like one of the cooler book plates we've had. And we've had a lot of, the Trad one was really good too. I just feel like we're on a roll. Comics are, look at all this content, like this amazing comics that we're doing. Fucking comics, yeah.
I too would like to thank myself for
Yes!
coming here.
Thank you!
And no, but really, thank you for coming. Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
It's been a total pleasure, and
Yeah.
have a wonderful night.
yeah. Thank you. We'll see you next month, guys. Take care.